Okay, very good afternoon to everybody. Real pleasure to have all of you with us. Uh, the topic we've decided to speak on today, and our invited guests are very excited to share their knowledge on something that's increasingly more important to Sri Lankans and, in fact, the world. Um, the three individuals whom we've invited to speak to you have vast experience in their specific spheres to do with this particular topic. Dr. Dharmasena, his fields of interest are soil and water management, agroecology, and ancient water heritage. He's been a consultant in agriculture and water management for 2 decades. He's also a visiting lecturer at the Rajarata University, and I've had the pleasure of diving deep into the Habarana jungles with him in search of the Belankadawal Cascade system, which was only one experience I've had with him, but it was quite a learning experience. We have Mr. Sanjeev Vijayasinghe, who is a walking encyclopedia as far as information and knowledge on particularly ancient wisdom is concerned. A man of numbers. He's an engineer, a graduate from University of Moratuwa. He's currently additional general manager at the Central Engineering Consultancy. He's conducted a series of research on engineering heritage in Sri Lanka, including the Weber and the Yodala system, etc. We have Jayanta Vijayasinghe with us as well, an award-winning climate champion and a conservationist who's I've seen personally how passionate he is about conserving Sri Lanka's bountiful nature. He's also the convener of Rainforest Protectors of Sri Lanka. Now, very briefly, I just want to discuss and explain our topic. Leadership lessons from Sri Lanka's ancient water heritage. Leadership is something that we all speak of more often than not today, be it political leadership, leadership in the corporate world, or even leadership in academic circles. Leadership is what it's all about. And leadership, the philosophy of leadership also becomes important. I'm sure all of us have read at least a book about the leadership style of Genghis Khan or Alexander the Great, Sun Tzu, in more recent times, Steve Jobs, Henry Ford, and people like this. And a whole concept of leadership is fairly Western, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's fine. But there's also a misconception that that model of leadership is an overall overriding model of leadership that existed and has existed for centuries and for eons across the world. If you consider history as well, we would often hear of and read about the great civilizations of the world, like Egypt, Greek and Roman civilization, etc., the Aztecs and the Incas in South America. But you would hear less about the civilization that existed right here in Sri Lanka. So what we're going to talk about today is essentially briefly that philosophy of leadership that existed in Sri Lanka and how different it was to what we probably used to hearing about what leadership is. The incredible systems that were created as a result of that leadership philosophy, the systems that helped Sri Lankans manage their water and not just build tanks, but build an entire civilization out of that system. And to help me do that, I have these three wonderful individuals. I'm going to start with Dr. Dharmasena. Dr. Dharmasena, welcome. Very basic question. Why did Sri Lankan hydraulic engineers attempt to manage water?
Okay, thanks, Shawan. You reminded me that we were there in about 2-3 years ago in the forest, right? Belankadawal. And you can remember, yes. You can remember that we have come across some mysterious ruins in our history, right?
Yeah.
One of them that
That's right.
one of them that I can remember, rock lines shaped And still, I am in confusion because I don't know what it meant. It's still mysterious, right? And also, I can appreciate you and Mr. Amarasi, and you have had a good leadership to the team. So today we are going to talk about leadership, and you have done it excellent, right? If I start that leadership of this ancient Sri Lanka, especially in relation to water, they had a lot of problems, challenges, but they have done it very successful. That is why we are here to discuss about that. And one thing that we are talking today about leadership, and if I share with you how the leadership has gone to a success at different levels of this, can I share this? Here you will see that leadership at country level. About long ago, we had 10 kingdoms to govern the decentralized governance in relation to water. Now, if you see that KV Sastra, the northern part is there to take care of about 20 arrows. And if you go ahead with these small locations, Kavastalaba, that is Yangwaya, most probably that is the Sigiriya. Then Kalaway Basin is managed by the kingdom here, Upulangiri, that is Dambulla. Mallatoya by Rakungiri, that is Ritigala. Like that, you can see that Indra, Agni, Mahagiri, Dhumakadira, Chalaka, and Nilagiri. So that is the decentralized governance that we had, especially that is based on water. That is why we wanted to talk about. And when we say that water resources are governed by different river basin leaders, that is inter-river basin level, you can see that one of these is Kalawaya, the other one is Mallatoya. One giant canal is there to share water between Dambuloya or later on Kalawaya and Mallatoya. At the same time, you can see that Kanadaravaya and Mallatoya, there's another giant canal. Still, you can see the remnants of this. And this is the basin level leaders shared their grievances in relation to water. And you see the master plan that we had, not only at country level, even at basin level. If you go down, further down, you can see that from reservoir to reservoir, you know that there were some reservoir leaders. We can get some stories like Kalava by one reservoir leader, Kadavara, yes, and also Urusitano, that is in the southern part, Urusitano. So they are the reservoir leaders. So from one reservoir to the other, they have shared water, so that they had some kind of relationship between these two. And also, there are some leaders, especially tank cascade system. I should say that they don't have any singular word for tank cascade system at that time, because tank cascade is a cluster of tanks which belong to the village. So there are Rala leaders. So Gamarala, that is the village leader. Kapurala, that is to provide organize rituals for the village. Then Danumatirala, that is the knowledgeable person in the village. Then Vedarala, that is medical practitioner. Then Nakatrala, who is providing all these auspicious times for agriculture and other activities. Then there are some places where you get another Rala called Sivrala. That means Sivru Hala. He has come from temple after having some periods as a monk. Then he reverted back to village. But he is a religious, knowledgeable man. So this collective leadership is there at the village level. And you can see that I will, if you permit me some more time, I can say that self-governing system in these villages. There are 10 commandments. One is for regulations for water security during drought. Then that is called Diyapattayam Tahanchiya. And also there are correct time of cultivation to reduce the risk. Niyamakanneta Govitembat. And also use of environment without destroying it. You see the value of their philosophy that to protect the environment. Gahakula Sata Sipawa, Binkari Vatura Yaibuwa. And also harvesting rainwater and store for future use. That's also self-governing system. And also make your mind free to attend religious events through raising 5 types of babies. Dumping petty pasparani hadapan wadapan. You know, that is, these are the babies, 5 babies, petty pasparani. Child, calf, kitten, pup, and chick. So anybody can concentrate their minds without any problems. If they have any problems, they will, those will disappear by watching what these small babies are doing. So this is what they say about self-governing system. So the commandments are there, they will obey them and they will do whatever that they need. But the leadership is there, and also the self-governance system is also there. This is the difference between Western leadership and our leadership. There are freedom for people to obey some kind of commandments. This is work as a team. Then store excess grains for future use. That is the security. They say, Vikurahan Sambare Atupatu Purvan Rale. Then what is impossible if everything is with you? That means they are not really dependent on others from outside, like what we are doing today. Say they say, then they have to gain their knowledge, preserve their knowledge, and protect the knowledge for another generation in future. Kempahan Danagan, Sanuhari Rekkan. Finally, they want to see that they want to preserve their cultural arts. That is, they say that Kavisinduragan Hitarakawaddapan. Those are the things that the real rhythm of this rural life in the past. And also, what I want to tell you that this is something different from Western leadership, but this leadership is self-governed at village level, and some leadership is there at country level, river basin level, and reservoir level. So that this is the kind of leadership. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Dharmasena. That was amazing. The kind of wisdom and knowledge that this nation is replete of and considers part of its history is only just being discovered by people like you, and future generations and today's generation, in fact, would be, I think, would benefit greatly by this information that you're sharing. Sanjeev, I'm going to move on to you now. You're a man of numbers. Okay, you're a man whose profession is based on mathematics, exacts and specifics. But you also believe in a very ancient wisdom that existed and exists in Sri Lanka. That was the basis and the philosophy that created these incredible systems. Now, we need to understand and remember that this system doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. We have river civilizations, but the Vava civilization, I'm not sure exists anywhere in the way it exists here. What was the philosophy that led to the creation of these systems of soil conservation more than just storage tanks.
Yeah, thank you very much, Shivan, for giving me this opportunity. And also, we had a very successful discussion 3-4 months ago. I consider this is as a continue of the same. So
right.
I want to share my screen, and with that, I will explain what is our philosophy. So, Shivan, can you see the slides?
Yep, we can see it.
Yeah.
Continue.
Okay. So, while thanking everybody, first we must understand that where we live on. Actually, we live on Earth. The Earth system is. We must understand that this is a closed system for matter, especially material-wise. We are not getting anything from the outside. The only external influence is solar radiation, which is gained from the sun, and also back radiation from the Earth atmosphere. Therefore, the sustainable. So we are very much talking about the sustainability today, and therefore the system. So any system to sustainable, these parameters, these basic parameters, water, soil and atmosphere has to be maintained within suitable limits. So our activities with involved in materials always has to be cyclic. Accordingly, we can avoid this disorder situation in the environment. So if you look at these graphs, you can understand how our process go out of cyclic nature. If that parameters, if that basic parameters, water and our other parameters will change drastically, then it will be a problem to the whole living being. You can see what was happened with the onset of Industrial Revolution. You can see that global average temperature also increases, and the surface temperature also increases. All environment parameters have got changed drastically. And if you take this environment pollution, what is this environment pollution? We are talking about a lot of things in the environment pollution. I'm explaining to come to your topic actually, to your question.
Yeah.
So this Earth system, Earth matter, that is material, now is converting to waste material, and also energy is also converting waste energy. So accumulation of all these waste we call environment pollution. Then this concept of sustainability arises from the. It is also came from the West as well, and they are also trying to define this sustainability. But their problem is basically they are trying to keep their development structure. They are trying to come to a sustainable, stable, sustainable development state. But this is actually this is unachievable thing. I will explain you. To overcome all these things, they are talking about renewable energy, carbon footprint, hybrid technology, lot of things. They came out with lot of solutions, but all these solution is addressing only the very narrow part of this sustainable problem. As an example, if you take hybrid technology, if you use some car with a battery, with a battery power, yes, so it reduces air pollution. But at the end of a day, at the end of the lifetime of the battery, you will have to dump it. Where you are going to dump it? Definitely you will have to dump it into the soil, onto the soil. Then this will cause to soil pollution. Then it's not something like air pollution. Soil pollution is more dangerous thing, because of we can't convert it to the again to the original state. You can convert air pollution to the original state to some extent with the plants and other things, but you can't convert the polluted soil to the original state. And so carbon footprint also same. This also catered the very narrow part of this problem. And sorry. And the this high quality so any system to sustainable, I said that the system should be cyclic. So accordingly, this high quality energy from the sun could be absorbed by the system, and the low quality energy could be emitted to the outer space. And also there should be a certain property, a self-organizing feature should be exist within the system. Otherwise, you can't keep the sustainable process within the system. So a biological system, flora or plants could absorb this energy, high quality energy without generation of heat, and emits as low quality energy to outer space. So biological system also has the capability of performing cyclic process, as well as it has inherent feature of self-organization. So it means that every physical mechanical entities have only the characteristic of decay. Since the inception of any physical mechanical entity is subject only decay, but biological system, it has an inherent property of formation against this decay. So when it has become even biological system become a dead state, it also acts as same characteristics as physical mechanical. But if it is in a living condition, it has that formation ability. So and this, as I said, that biological system can absorb free energy from the sunlight without disorder in the system or without heat in the system. But if you get a physical or mechanical system, it can absorb the disordering or heating energy from the sun. As an example, if you take the asbestos sheet, it can absorb only this disordering or heating energy. That's why it gets heated. When absorb the sunlight, it gets heated. But if you take plants, when it get this energy from the sun, it will never get heated because of it absorbs some energy that is free energy. It is good quality energy. It can absorb good quality energy directly from the sun. Accordingly, this biological system is very, very important when we are talking about this sustainability. And from this point, I will try to take a different perception based on our actually our Dhamma, our Abhidharma. So according to our Abhidharma, the whole nature, whole world consists of ultimate forms, which are known as Tejo, which are known as, one is Tejo Dhatu, which contribution, formation or deformation of the entities. And also there is another ultimate form that is called Apo, which contributes flowing and attraction. And also there's another one that is Vayo, that is associates with the expansion and contraction, while Patavi Dhatu associates with solidity and hardness. But as normal human being, we can only sense very minute part of this ultimate forms. To sense more about that, you have to develop your mind and your other faculty according to Abhidhamma, Dhamma. And this forming energy of the sun is known as Sita Tejo, and the heating part of the same is known as Usna Tejo according to Dhamma. When this Sita Tejo is absorbed by plants, the similar Tejo Dhatu in plants will carry out the formation process. That is forming the ecosystem as well as the formation of food for all living beings. Now, for the proper functioning of this Tejo Dhatu of the plants, it needs Apo Dhatu as well, which provides the liquid-like effect. That is water in the context. This was the sole intention of our water heritage. Actually, this is the basic philosophy behind our water heritage. And in a nutshell, the sole objective coming with that physical philosophical background, its main aim was to enrich the soil with water and to increase the biological fertility of the same. So with that remarks, may I continue further, or shall
let me come back to you. Let me come back to you, Sanjeev. Because just that was a fabulous introduction to the philosophy of soil conservation, and I think that's a fairly complex concept to get our heads around it in a short space of time.
Yeah,
but it's important that our audience understands that what we're talking about here is not simply collecting water and then distributing it for agricultural purposes, but something much deeper than that, something that involved nature as a holistic process that needed to be nourished and protected in order for a final result. Now, we have a young Jayanta with us, a man who's grappling with the problems of this system tearing down. Jayanta, you are a person who's at the forefront of conservation, and you're always, championing the cause of protecting our nature. So I want to ask you now, you also have experience in being introduced to these wonderful ancient heritage systems of ours. What do you see as, how do you see the breaking down of this system in modern times in Sri Lanka with the systems and the nature that you're constantly coming face to face with?
Thank you very much, Shivan, and thank you very much, Dhammadda, for giving me this opportunity to talk about the ecology and the environmental components. I hope you can hear me. First of all, I'm so sorry. My internet connection is very weak. And can I be permitted to switch off my video and talk? Because I think that way you will hear me better. Otherwise, you will not hear me or you won't see me both.
Please go ahead. That's fine.
Thank you very much. So I apologize once again for this connection issue that I have, something that I didn't expect. But having said that, once again, thank you very much for News First, Dhammadda. And talking about water leadership and the current modern day status. In fact, I have a little presentation. I will not run the whole presentation, but if I may be permitted to share this presentation.
Yeah, please go ahead, Jayanta.
Okay, I hope you all can see this.
Yes, we can see it.
Right. Okay. Now, if you look at our history, something that I was very fascinated is that our kings usually were selected based on their skill to manage water, how good they were in terms of managing water, conserving water, and helping the food production. If you speak of King Dutugamlu, for instance, before he started going on a war against King Elara, what he did is he sent his brother to different parts of the country so that he could make tanks and ensure that food production continues properly so that we have enough food when the war is fought. So this is something from the history. But also, if you look at the entire world, we know almost all civilizations in the entire world was based on these major rivers. You speak of China, the Hindu civilization, and if you look at Euphrates, Tigris, Egypt, and all these places, all these were mainly based on the major rivers. Now, that is, if you look at some of the conflicts that we have seen over the history, and even the some of the most recent conflicts based on water are very long ongoing battles and conflicts between countries for water. Similarly, it's pretty much the same in Sri Lanka. If you look at Kalani River, pretty much provides water for more than 2 million people. So similarly, we have Mahabali River, where we have most of our agriculture happening. And of course, you know, Sri Lanka as a country, we have had a great history. Our hydraulic civilization is just one. But if you look at in terms of sustainability, the term sustainability, we've been using it for thousands of years. Only after 2015, officially the world decided to move on to sustainable development era from Millennium Developmental Goals. So there were a lot of things that we could obviously, as some say, boast about. But the problem is that are we really have taken the lessons to the next level in terms of how we manage things today? Now, when it comes to the historical lessons that we've learned in terms of leadership, we've had more than 30,000 tanks that were built by various kings. And the first one was built 300 years ago, 300 years before Christ. So we have a massive history where we have been very successful in terms of our food security, our water security, and ecological balance, and all of these. So now we have a question today: who is the greatest king? For many people, they see King Parakramabahu is the greatest king, and for some people, some argue that King Dutugabunu is the greatest king in the history. Obviously, there are other people who think otherwise, and we might have different kings. In the case of the times of where Buddhism that arrived in the country is another idea that people believe in. But however, King Parakramabahu is one of the kings, undoubtedly, that we regard as one of the best kings we have had in this country. Now, what he said is very important. He said, "Let not a single drop of water go to waste into the sea without benefiting the world." Now, this is something very important that I came across when I had a chat recently with Professor Madhuma Bandara. This particular word, the word world, is actually misunderstood in many ways, because we think when we say world, we think it's for the use of humans only. But actually, this word has a very broad meaning, where it is ensuring the ecological balance. It is for wildlife, elephants and all these species even today survive because of our tanks mostly. If we didn't
I think the
have
singular
these
word
tanks,
used is Lokopakare.
Exactly.
Jayanta, I think
So
I think, yeah, Lokopakare, yeah.
Is my line breaking again?
No, please go ahead.
Right. Thank you very much. And
Jayanta, you can go ahead.
The key issue we have to identify when we speak of today's context is that all these water that we have collected in the low-lying areas are the water that generated from the central hills, if not our hills. So, but unfortunately today, it seems that we have not really looked at the importance of the catchment areas, and we are going and building reservoirs in the central hills. So that is something where we have to really focus on, because I find that most of our kings and the current politicians think that in their times that they need to build the biggest reservoir of all. Now, if we continue to do this, if we go on this route and think that building the largest reservoir would make your name popular as a ruler or a king or any other for that matter, I think that is a big mistake. And why I would say so is that if you look at the history, we have particularly looked at the drought prone areas to build these reservoirs. Now, in the case of Wayamba, in the case of North Central, are the key areas that we picked to build these reservoirs and tank cascade systems, because this area needed more water to change its climate, change its weather, microclimate, to change agricultural lands, to make dry lands wetlands, and to feed wildlife and to grow forests and things like that. So I think we need to look at how history has happened and today, whether we are doing the right thing today. So learning lessons from the history, the leaders from the past, and applying it to today's context smartly is very important, which I don't see is happening. And I will move on to my last bit. Now, these are the areas are tanks and tank cascades were available. And if you look at districts, in terms of district, Vavuniya, Anuradhapura, Puttalam, Kurunegala, Hambantota are some of the districts. And if you look at the elevations, this is one of the other important thing. Between 100 meters to 500 meters were the ones where we found our tank cascades and majority of tanks. And similarly, we also had various area that cascades and the general usual individual tanks in areas where there were minimum rainfall. But now I will move on to today's context. If you really look at where we are building tanks and reservoirs today, are the areas where we treated as catchments. And therefore, I think we are moving in the wrong direction in terms of water management, and that water management is absolutely not the smart water management, and that leadership is eventually has resulted in prolonged droughts, lack of water, and then we have to now provide water to our national parks, and then we have severe floods because we have built up dams in wrong places, and then we have severe pollution in terms of our canals and our waterways. And then, this is one of the projects that we have done very badly, I would say. This project was initiated to provide water to Hambantota. Apparently now it can't apparently provide enough water. Now we are going to build Gingnilwala, and this is what happened when the Umawe was built, and this is what the people faced at that time. And this is how the wells were dried and the dry land cultivation, if not Godawagawa, faced. And these river basins that used to flow flawlessly were blocked. And similarly, some of these catchment areas, whether be it Singharaja, for instance, Ganga, Singharaja is the catchment, and for Nilwala, Ganga is also the same. And if you look at Sripad area, that's another catchment area. Knuckles provides more than 35% of water to Mahavali River, and the Knuckles is degrading at a greater speed. So, and we have built Moragahakanda project by decimating about 10,000 acres in the Knuckles. And this is where we build Moragahakanda. Now, what happens is our catchment is degrading at a faster rate, and therefore we cannot trap enough clouds, and we cannot create enough rain for these reservoirs to hold water, and also for the reservoirs in the sloping areas to get enough water, because we are blocking everything. And this is what is going to happen next, which is Gingnilwala. And this is the next reservoir project that's going to happen. And my final conclusion is that I think we have not properly understood the leadership lessons and the lessons that the kings have taught us in terms of smart water management and smart agriculture and smart hydraulic civilization that we were once the pioneers of. And now we are trying to replicate something which was not really the case in terms of the historical kings were concerned when they built up their reservoirs. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jayant. A very worrying future indeed. Dr. Dharmasena, we've been speaking about a lot of complex reality. What I want to ask you is a very simple question. I'm sure you will have a complex answer to this, but I think for the benefit of those of us who've joined us and are wondering what a cascade system is. In very simple terms, what is a cascade system?
Okay, thank you, Isha.
Dr. Dharmasena, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now. Right. You wanted to ask from me about the cascade systems, right? Okay, just I want to tell you that that is something we have. One of these, can I share here? Yes. Before I go to talk about this cascade level, we have a very nice, brilliant master plan for water resources management. As I told you at the beginning, country level, inter-river basin level, inter-reservoir level, and sub-watershed level. The sub-watershed level is the level that we are talking about tank cascade systems. Now, this is the landscape that we have in Sri Lanka, especially in the dry zone. We have different landscapes. If you look at Mana side, we have a flat land. And also, if you look at Hambantota side, we have a flat land. But when you come across, make a straight line from Mana to Hambantota, you will pass a lot of undulating landscapes, where you get a lot of tanks. So this undulation allowed us to form tank clusters. We call tank cascade systems. I just want to spell it again that these tanks are in tank cascades, and people are searching for different names for this one in Sinhala, but I am sure that this is the village where we can have all these tank systems. And the villagers are enjoying all these, not for irrigation always. Please remember that, because there are different types of tanks. One is the wild tanks, tanks in the jungle, we call Kulu. Kulu means wild, right? So those are not for irrigation. Those are meant for wild animals, and also to raise the groundwater in the upper part of the cascade. Then we can have Ulagam well. Ulagam well means the tank without village. So they don't have a village there, but they can cultivate using this water, the Ulagam well. And also there are some other kind of well. Biso well. Biso well means if you want to have water to the main tank, then it can be released from Biso well if there's tank, if there's water in that particular tank. Basso well or Biso well or storage tanks. Then there are some other types of tanks. Kayam well, that is the tank to trap sediment coming from Chena lands. That's also another kind of tank. And also there are some other tank systems here and there, but not meant for irrigation. So if somebody is misconceptually understand that all these are meant for irrigation, that is the devastating situation that we are facing now at the moment. Now, if you look at...
so one of these,
yes.
Dr. Dharmasena, sorry, I'm just going to interject for a moment. So what you're essentially saying is that a cascade system is made up of many different tanks that serve different purposes, that are interconnected and operate as a single system. How many such systems do we have in Sri Lanka?
At the moment, the Department of Agrarian Development has recorded 1,162 tank cascade systems. Okay, and
That's amazing.
yes, now also that Jayant has shown you some the maps showing that the three cascade zones. One is northern part and north central province. That is one zone. The other one is northwestern province zone. The other one is Ruhunu zone or Rohana zone. That is southern part of our country. So all these zones represent about more than 80% of the whole tank cascade systems. Now, when you say tank cascade systems, I am telling again and again that is not a tank cascade system alone. It is the village. So villages have all these. Forest land they have, and wild tanks, that is Kuluel, the villages are having, and they have constructed those things. Then Kayamweva, Kulueva, Olagamwa, everything belongs to the villages. So village has a very excellent way of organizing all these things to assure the sustainability of the system. And also, you know that as I told you at the beginning, they loved the environment. They wanted to protect flora and fauna. And also at the same time, they want to get a very crystal clear water into the tank. How they did it? They constructed one Godavala sediment trap here.
Yeah.
Then they have Perahana here. That is the filter or the grass meadow. Then there are some other tree strips here, gas common, to cut off the advection to reduce the evaporation from this tank. And also there are two earth ridges here, either side of the upstream part of the tank. We call the Issati or Potavati. Issati, yes. So this upstream ridge will divert all this water with pollutants, with sediments. Divert, and it slowly moves there. Once it is moving slowly, the sediments will be deposited. That is the technology. And finally, these people have received a crystal clear water meant even for drinking. Even I can remember in 1960s, also I saw that people have drunk this water from the tank. Now it is polluted because of this fertilizer and agrochemicals especially. And there are some other segments here. One is that it is land strip sandwich with the tank and the paddy field. That is called Katakadu. That is to filter all these pollutants like sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium, even ferric ions, all this. And there's one Yaturuwala to get this all water, salt affected water, and prevent this water entering into the paddy field. Once it enters into the paddy field, the paddy crop will get destroyed. So they have a lot of things, strategies. And finally, once it rains during Maha season, this polluted water will move through common drainage, that is called Kivulala. And all these segments of land uses have specific purposes. For example, here, Gangoda or Gammadda, and it is surrounded by a strip of land that is called Tispambe. And there's another kind of land here, Lande. All these are meant for specific purposes. For example, here, Tispambe is the place where you get all these solid waste. And they have used this one for sanitary purposes. Female and kids are here, and the male farmers, they will go here for sanitary purposes. The beauty is that all these are decomposed and finally contributing to the enhancement of fertility in this paddy field. So you see the recycling process here. I mean, it is automated kind of device, right? So everything is there, but the problem is, unfortunately, now we can't see all these segments there to take care of water, at the same time take care of the soil fertility. That is the problem.
Brilliant
Okay,
engineering
sir.
indeed.
You
Thank you,
want-
Dr. Dharmasena. I'm going to move on to Sanjeeva. Actually, it was a question I was going to ask you. As an engineer, you have researched and seen for yourself the incredible components of a Weber. Can you describe the creation, the innovation, and the specifications of these components? You know, we hear a lot about the Bisoko tour, the Sorowa, and some of the other components that Dr. Dharmasena was referring to. But I'd like you to give us an engineering perspective on these innovations from thousands of years ago.
Yes. Okay, let me first share the screen. Yes, this is one of Bisoko tour Sorowa at Urusita Weber. So with the invention of Bisoko tour by our ancestors, it was able to regulate the water discharge from Mahaweber to the canals. Because of normally this kind of Mahaweber, it has a large head. If we are unable to maintain and regulate this water stem, it will damage to the dam. So to overcome this damage and the pressure, our ancestors were able to create this marvelous structure. So these are some Bisoko tour sluices, and there are also some misconception of the Bisoko tour as a valve pit, especially our colonial during the colonial period. People like Brohier and Parker, they have done a lot of investigations about our system, and they came out with marvelous notes on our irrigation systems. But at the same time, they identify this Bisoko tour as a valve pit because of their mindset is, when there is a tank, they identify this Weber as a tank, and always they think that a tank should have a controlling body or a gate. With that background, they identify this Bisoko tour as a valve pit. And considering Bisoko tour is the place for fixing the gates. And but the thing is, in contrast, there are no evidence. Even today also, no any artifacts has found of such gates. No sign was found over its smooth inner surface to trace any fixing mechanism of a such gate. So protecting the dam, reducing the pressure of water and flow rate of water is a basic principle of this Bisoko tour. And due to viscous and turbulent effects of the water flow into the Bisoko tour, pressure and velocity of water from high head was reduced. So it depends on the volume of the Bisoko tour. That is why this Bisoko tour has a large volume. So when the water comes to this large volume Bisoko tour, it suddenly expands and it touches with the water, and accordingly it release its energy within the water. With that phenomena, they have reduced the water has reduced its pressure, and this is a diagram. This is a diagram which describes how to this water come into the Weber, as well as how this water releases from the releases through this Visokotua. You can see during the storm period, a heavy water coming into the Weber, but this Visokotua takes some period of time to release this water to the system in a very calm and quiet way. So in natural flow, high velocity creates erosion. So thereby, there are large volume and spaces are created. At these spaces, water will get calm. So as an example, there are a lot of such places in Yodala as well. And also there are some man-made formation in the ancient Yodala. This is called Diyakaliya. So when water enters into this Diyakaliya, it gets calm because of it touches with the water remaining in this Diyakaliya. And when it touches with this existing water, it dissipates its energy to the environment. With that phenomena, this pressure water get calm. You can see how it get calms with this small video graph. This is the situation in Erubava, how they release the water through a Visokotua. This is the ancient Visokotua, but during the colonial period, it has fixed with gates. You can see how they releases the water, very calm and quiet, like water in the river, it goes out. But in the modern systems, we can see this is also Sarovar or sluice. You can see how this modern reservoir, this is a recently constructed, this is how it releases the water, dissipated high energy to the environment and disordering the environment. With all the modern technology, we are unable to control this water releasing. So this is the situation of Visokotua. So with that remarks, may I come to the function of Yodala. You can see a remaining part of Yodala with this is a remaining part of Yodala stretched from Kalabeva to Tisabeva. So this is how this Yodala goes along a contour. Actually, this Yodala, it has only one bank. Actually, this is called single bank in Yodala. The bank, only one side it has a dam. The other side there is no dam. It allows to enter the water from its upstream. While it flowing along the contour, it collects the water from its higher elevations. And at the same time, it releases the water to the downstream. Downstreams, you can see.
Sanjay, can I just ask you a quick question?
Yes.
So is this why our ancients referred to this process as Vevak Netnang Elak Benda rather than Hedua?
Yes.
Because they only dammed one side.
Yes.
And then created the canal based on the contours of the land rather than cut a ditch.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. They actually have manipulated the existing ground profile to convey this water because of the main purpose of soil is one thing is to transfer the water through the soil, and the other thing is the soil is they use soil as a storage component as well. Now this when we consider this Yodala, it acts as a elongated reservoir, not like only a canal. It's an elongated reservoir. So when water does not flows, it like as a vapor again, because of all the water fields surrounding area, and it acts as a vapor. So
Right.
this flowing is depends on the demand at the endpoints.
Hmm.
So this is the one survey done in the colonial period. You can see how this goes along the contour, and it is not a straight path. It does not take a straight path, and the bund is situated this side, and there is no bund the upper side. You can see the cascades in the downstream, while this water goes along this village, this Yoda Ala, it serves water to this cascade system as well. This is how our ancestors were able to construct a Yoda Ala, which stretches from Kalababa to Tisababa. It takes length is more than 56 miles. Actually, it is 80 miles.
What is the gradient?
Actually, there is no gradient because of they take contour path to convey this water. Water conveys the phenomena of overflowing, not because of its gradient. Water conveys due to the phenomena of overflowing. So you can see this is the bund, and there is no bund the other side. You can see water can enter from this side. So while this water flows along this stretch, they serve the water the other side. The paddy fields are here downstream. And the thing is now during the Mahaveli period, this Yoda Ala has converted to slope canal. So you can see only the ancient Yoda Ala up to Mahilupalama. After that, you can't see this original Yoda Ala because of now it has converted to the slope canal, and also they have introduced another dam to the other side as well after the Mahilupalama, and accordingly this has become a defined wall slope canal. Now it can't serve the downstream cascade system as it was done earlier because of these changes. And also very recently, if you can remember that last Sunday papers, it was published that that Epavula people who protested because of now their areas are inundated with the water because of these changes. Earlier, this during the storm period, this Ala can get water from the collects water from the upstream. Now, after they define the bunds and after they construct another bund on the other side, this collection of water is difficult into this canal. Because of that, that Epavula area got flooded, and they protected. Now, why this has changed? Now only they can realize what was the real value of this kind of Ala. And also the other thing is that this I can't understand why this knowledge base this knowledge base has preserved as a museum piece. It's not a museum piece actually. We should be able to adopt this system even in today also. When we construct other irrigation projects, we can adopt this system even today also. So without doing that, we are trying to keep this as only in the museums or in our heritage galleries, it is meaningless actually. So our present engineers and technocrafts all should have that ability to make use of these ancient systems, because of this is the most sustainable and eco-friendly system. It will provide a lot of solution to the present crisis as well. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Sanjeeva. That was incredible information and knowledge. Jayanta, I wish that we had all the time in the world, but I'm going to have to come to you very briefly to hear your thoughts as a young person, a young Sri Lankan involved in conservation. What are the emotions and the feelings that run through your mind when you see some of the stuff that's going on today, like this mismanagement of our ancient wevers? It's very important here that all of us start calling it a wever, because it's not a tank, as we've heard everybody speak today. I think we should all perhaps get together and write to Oxford and Cambridge and ask them to include the word wever into the English dictionary, because it truly is a very special word with a special definition. The word tank doesn't even begin to explain what a wever is, as we've learned today. But as a young a conservationist, what are emotions when you see some of the stuff, some of the damage done to our ecosystems, particularly the wever, in your work as an environmentalist? Jayanta, can you hear me?
Very important point you raised, Shravan, in terms of naming it Weber. Unfortunately, some of the words that are there. Yes, I can hear you. How about you? Can you hear me?
Jayanta, you're a little unclear. I think your bandwidth is pretty low right now. Can you try again?
Can you hear me, Shravan?
It's a little better. Can you just keep sharing your thoughts?
Is it still the same?
Yeah,
right,
pretty much.
Okay. Thank you, Shravan. Actually, a very valid point you raised about the tank, or if not wever. Yes. Now, when it comes, have forgot some of these herbs, probably the colonials implanted in us, in our vocabulary, so that it's easy for them to basically manage some of our resources. So we actually, if you really look at all these herbs and the plants that we have, there is no weeds in Sri Lanka per se. What we have are pretty much all herbs. So coming back to the question you raised, what do we see looking at some of the destruction, some of these ecosystems, including heartbreaking. I have seen thousands of millions spent on some of these tank restorations over the last decade. These are not rupees, these are US dollar. Thousands of millions of US dollars spent on tank restoration projects. But if you really look at the final outcome, as opposed to the purposes and the services that these wever used to provide to our community, is very heartbreaking, because I don't find eventually these tank restorations or wever restorations give enough benefits to the communities, looking at the amount of money spent on them. For instance, some of these wever restorations or tank restorations, we always find that the indigenous knowledge is disregarded. I will take two examples. One is that we saw some of these, I have to name here, but I'm sure that nobody will, get offended. I have studied some of the World Bank projects when it comes to tank restorations, and we have had situations that we had to argue, and we had to basically have discussions to see if and what they're saying are true in terms of having green belts on the river, or rather tank close to tanks, and there are canals. So the argument of some of the irrigation engineers, part of it, the irrigation engineers, not every one of them, some of the specialists say that having kumbuk and some of the other types of trees inside the tank close to the well absolutely have no harm, but some experts argue that that you cannot have any tree in the tank, especially in the tank bund area. But some projects have actually removed completely all the green cover, the trees that we have had on tanks. So this is one area that we actually try to understand. It's confusing in a way. If these trees could, years, if not thousands of years, why not now? Number two, when we look at some of these tank restorations, how they are being done, and even the small canals, everything is being concreted. Now, when you concrete everything, now right now the Minipe Canal is being concreted. I'm pretty sure that is done with the purpose of preserving more water. But what about then the ecosystem services provided through these canal banks, and then to the soil and the groundwater, and there are plenty of other services that's been done. So I think our indigenous knowledge and development, which I don't think is bad always, but in certain cases, it looks like we have forgotten the basics of our ancient irrigation. So and finally, one other point I want to make, like I mentioned earlier as well, some of these developments we fear eventually some of the reservoirs and some of the river restorations that are being done, and these will eventually increase our water security threats, and it will increase water scarcity rather than water conservation, because like I said, if you remove, now we mentioned about the Puluweba is located inside the forest. Similarly, we have Kalukale, something called a Kalukale, which means that nobody would touch Kalukale. For instance, Chena farmers will not go into the Kalukale, but they will slash and burn somewhere which is mostly shrub, if not a Kalukale with massive tree cover. So I think when we develop reservoirs, or when we implement irrigation projects, when we develop any kind of restoration plan, I think we need to go back into drawing books and have a look at how we have done it in the past, and see what is more sustainable, not destroy the very systems that eventually provides us water. And I think finally, water leadership, if not the proper leadership, means not creating probably hundreds of tanks, or if not restoring some 500 or 1,000 tanks. I don't think creating the biggest reservoir in the country is the proper leadership, or it will create a name for a politician over a ruler. Rather, I believe that smart and intelligent use of existing systems, which can still benefit and provide us both food security and water security, must be furthered and enhanced and conserved.
What a wonderful way to end this fabulous discussion. I wish I could open the forum up for questions, but that just isn't time. We committed to close this in 1 hour. It's already over an hour. But the amount of information and wisdom shared by the three of you is fabulous. And I'm so thankful that you were so honest and forthright. That famed scholar Joseph Needham in the 1970s, I think it was, he recognized Sri Lanka's ancient hydraulic heritage as the most preeminent technology in the world. He said the Chinese civilization was ahead in almost every aspect except hydraulic heritage of Sri Lankans. So we have a lot to be proud of. And every time we think that we should follow a model that is outside of Sri Lanka, perhaps we should start by looking at the incredible leadership philosophy right here in this little island, this island civilization that stood with its head held high amongst the greatest civilizations in the world, and its people who founded a civilization based on one word, and that is the truth. The truth derived out of fact. And I think that is something we can all be proud of. Thank you, gentlemen, for your time, for sharing your knowledge, for all the participants. I know this has been a complicated discussion. It's not been our usual B-Force discussions, but you've held on and you've listened. And I'm sure that this will be the start of a journey of self-discovery where you can do your own research and reach out to these experts and learn for yourself our incredible hydraulic heritage, because it is our heritage. It's something that we can be proud of. Thank you and have a good day.
Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Shah.
Thank you, Shivan. Thank you very much.